This is TAZA, a knowledge series brought to you by Alliance for Coffee Excellence and Cup of Excellence.
I think that Stephen actually has a really interesting question, and Aaron, you might be able to speak to this a little bit about how consistently the same farmers are submitting these types of coffees, and how consistent do they seem to be year after year? Are we seeing anything like that right now in the COE competitions, or is it all pretty varied?
I have to say, I mean, this all goes back to 2015, so that's like our earliest data set. And as you can see, it really only was like one coffee, two coffees over time that went to auction. And during those times, I wasn't looking at the participation, so it's hard for me to go back. What I can say about the results is, I believe the original is El Diamante from Costa Rica, and they have consistently delivered what I would consider, like, whatever people describe to me that coffee as, that's exactly what I experienced. And I have continued to experience that over the 2+ years I've been with Cup of Excellence and seeing these coffees. So I think that's like our longest track record. So they're able to show that. In my time, you know, I think in 2018 was the first time we saw at least a coffee going to auction in Colombia with anaerobic process. You know, Paul was a head judge in 2018 and 19. I was there with him during International Week. And I can say that experience with the same farmer, although it was the same farmer, same stated process, I consider the flavor profiles to be distinctly different. So that was something that was interesting. They're both distinct, and I can pick it out on the table that this is probably an experimental process. However, they were not notably, oh, you're gonna taste this because last year you tasted that. So that was interesting. And that was actually another question. You know, I saw John Moore had made a comment in the chat about just for him, maybe his experience was more cinnamon and clove. And then it was interesting to hear these other descriptors. And I guess I wonder, and this is, I don't know if anyone can answer this, but I guess I wonder, with that information coupled with the process that we, you know, what we're talking about, okay, process is overriding this flavor, but you know, is it just enhancing what's already there? Is kind of also the question. Because if I can taste an anaerobic coffee and I can tell you, you know, I definitely have tasted lactic acid. I've tasted a different anise one that's super strong, eucalyptus, cinnamon, like all of those different profiles for me have come up in an anaerobic, or at least an experiment. I keep calling it experimental because I don't believe they're the best definitions maybe right now out there, not perfect at least, let's say. And I guess that would be a question that, you know, only time will tell and research will tell, is whether, you know, are we getting those flavors because that's the process, or are we getting those flavors because it's just really enhancing the flavor that is already innately there. So just throwing that out there.
Okay, so perfect. So we put the cherries in the sealed tank for about 6 days until the pH level drops down to 4.2. For these coffees, we only use coffee. What I mean by that is, like, we don't use any foreign substance like juice or any other stuff. And once the coffee is ready, we remove the cherries and we put it on a raised African bed for 72 hours directly, so they could get the sun. After the 72 hours, we move the cherries into a shaded bed, so the sun is not touching it directly. After that, the coffee dries for about 26 days, but it just depends on the weather. And after it dries, we let the coffee sit at the warehouse for a good 2 weeks before we move it to Addis Ababa.
And I'm curious about one of the things that we've been experiencing is with many of the anaerobic coffees, they may end up coming in with a very low moisture content, sometimes below the range that's acceptable for our standard. And yet they cup at a high score. I wonder if you could address that a little bit. And I'm sure we might have some other people commenting on some of that as well.
I definitely agree. Most or majority of the coffee that we did do, they are very not where they should be. Sometimes they're like maybe like below 9 or maybe even 8.5. But what I try to tell like the coffee buyers is I'm sure they are dry, but they keep their flavors and their profile for like a lot more, for even like for more than 1 year sometimes. Cause I cupped the coffee from last year and it's still very nice coffee, the flavors, high scores. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but if I have to choose, I'd probably say it's good for these kind of coffees.
Oh, that was really this has been the biggest issue that we've had as an organization, is that we don't have enough science to understand the longevity of these coffees. Will they taste very different 6 months from now? Will they end up kind of falling apart, so to speak? And we're rethinking a lot of these standards that the industry accepts, and trying to understand how these coffees interact. And what are your primary markets where these specific coffees are going, I should say, that you've been experimenting with? I'm just curious.
We started this last year, so our main market, I'll probably say Taiwan, China, Korea. Now maybe some Japan.
Interesting. That's something that we also looked at yesterday regarding the historical sales have been primarily to Japan, and but a little bit everywhere, really. I mean, we found U.S., Japan, Korea, but in the early beginning, Japan seemed to be the strongest, but also Saudi Arabia, Russia.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Saudi for sure, yes.
Can I ask how long you've been doing these like experimental processes, and like maybe what made you start doing them?
We started this last year, and we just wanted to do something new, something different. And I think we went to like a coffee show and we cupped some coffees, and we just started to just talking at the office, and we just started doing something different last year, and this is our second year.
And how did you choose your approach? I mean, you mentioned that you're using pH as a monitor. What made you choose your variables and how you chose them?
I mean, just from doing some like the research and just using Google to see what makes good coffee. And I think maybe if the pH level is very high, maybe that would kind of make the coffee not where we want it to be. But before we got to this point, we did like a lot of coffees. Some of them were like really bad. Some of them had no flavor. Some of them were like what my friend was talking about. They tasted very like yogurty, milky. So we did a lot of stuff before we got to this level, I guess. Yes. So a lot of ups and downs for sure. So.
And I think you mentioned the variety, but the sound wasn't that good at that point. But would you state the variety again? Yeah.
The variety is Kurume, Kurume, Kurume. Yeah.
Okay. And that's specifically planted in the Sidama zone, or is it in other zones in Ethiopia as well?
Yes, I mean you can find that variety in for example like in Gadab or Aricha, like in a very high like an altitude is very high. You can find that kind of variety.
And maybe when you first started experimenting, did it seem kind of like a crazy idea to dry coffee for 27 days? And I mean, I'm sure there was a little bit of, yeah.
I mean, absolutely. First, you have to think about, am I going to sell this coffee? Are the buyers going to like it? Am I just wasting my money? But we just felt like we just wanted to do something new, something different, and see where that takes us. And like I said a while back, just a lot of like up and down. You definitely need a lot of passion, dedication to the coffee itself to do like this kind of experiment and actually do something that is good and that the people actually like. So we're very happy about how this turned out.
Great. Yeah, definitely.
We're all talking about our experience, but what do you think of your coffee? What are your notes and flavors and anything you want to comment on descriptors? I'm curious to know your own opinion, I guess.
Yes, I mean, I thought the coffee was very floral, like orange peel, like apple, very pleasant. It was very sharp, very creamy, but not the bad cream, like the good cream. And it had a very long finish, to a very long finish.
Steve and Vic had a question. Stephen, do you want to just jump in on that?
Yeah. Hi. Is that variety, you said Kurumi, is that the one that has kind of small cherries and then sometimes the tips of the flower end up out at the end, like little tails? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. I think it is. The beans are normally not like the whole time, but normally the beans are very tiny, very condensed.
Yeah, and it's like a dark red, and then sometimes you get the flower tip actually stays on as the cherry develops. If it's the one I remember seeing one time, and I'd never seen anything like that. And I think they told me that it was that variety, Karumbi.
And I think maybe I'm just fielding some other questions that Scott and Paul are talking about, some of the pH as an indicator. There, if you're looking at the chat, it's pretty interesting, some of the communication back and forth, and I guess Anam and you know your team. I guess, how would you describe the experience of the Cup of Excellence, and would you do it again, or we're just kind of curious? I know it's kind of a side note, but since we have you here.
Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the connection is a little bit.
Did you want me to restate that?
Yes.
Oh yeah, just how was the overall experience of the Cup of Excellence for you and your team, and would you enter again?
Absolutely. I think I don't know if you remember, but we were in Japan, me and my colleague Fish. I think it's 2017 maybe.
I totally remember meeting you, and
yes.
yeah, I've known Fish for a long time with
yes.
this experience. Yes, yeah.
Yes, so we met, and I was like, how come it's not in my country? And we started talking, and we got the ambassador, and everybody just got to talking. And when it finally came here, I was just very happy, and like the whole team was very happy. And we just focused on making the best coffee that we could, and we did, and we would definitely do this every year and the year after and every year from now on, for sure.
Great. Well, I thank you for sharing a little bit about the process and everything. It's for our team too, it's just been such a delight to do Ethiopia, and despite all of the issues we all face this year, right now it's still been like a shining light in a dark time. So we really appreciate you being involved, and yeah, that was great to be able to meet you, and you were one of the pieces that brought this whole process along to actually bring it to Ethiopia.
Yes.
Alex, any other points that you had on the overview that we put together or anyone that would like to jump in on any of the discussion?
Yeah, John Moore had written this comment in the chat, and I keep staring at it and thinking about it because it really was one of the reasons. He really hit the nail on the head as to one of the reasons why I was excited to have this talk. Maybe, John, do you mind sharing your question, and we can kind of start to wrap up talking about that, because I think it's really relevant and interesting.
Sure. So, these conversations are always really inspiring whenever this group gets together. It's always just amazing to sit back and listen. One of the things that's challenging for me as a head judge when we have coffees like this, and I've hit them a couple of times now, and I think it started with the emergence of naturals, and even my very first COEs when it was like Pacamara, what is that, but this is particularly challenging because the processing is so new, and people are experimenting. And as Aaron said, it's not really clear where the lines are drawn around how different processes are defined. So then it comes to us when we're dealing with a panel of 20 plus people, how do we get alignment around what is good or bad in scoring these coffees? And then are we trying to get alignment necessarily, given that each one of these people is representing their customers ultimately, right? They're buying what they can then turn around and sell to their markets. So I was just saying, when I was listening to you guys, Paul had mentioned that, the market dynamics are at work. It seems when he sees cuppers scoring, they're ultimately going to reward with their dollars at auction what their clients will buy. And Erwin had mentioned that there is good and bad in examples of this process in and of itself when you're managing the chemical processes at work. So are we looking at that? Aaron had mentioned that, these processes at their best seem to be augmenting or accentuating our appreciation of what's innate to these coffees, whether it's through the cultivar type or the origin itself. It's augmenting, not necessarily dominating the profile. And then Scott had mentioned, take a categorical approach and score each category appropriately. And then in the end, the sum should indicate, what your score would be. And these are all kind of different approaches from my perspective. And then we also have radically different juries every time, so in my experience, I've seen with the juries that I've had, some have been more open-minded than others. And it's interesting too to see the disparity between the national and international juries. So, oftentimes I found myself communicating to a national jury, when I've scored something higher than they had, or I've accepted something that they might normally reject altogether, I say, listen, the international jury may have an appreciation for this. It's important that we see this through. because you could be essentially preventing a farmer from achieving a premium that they might get if this does get the exposure. So I just wanted to throw it out there in the hopes that we could come out of this, maybe not even this one call, but maybe there's a follow-up call or session around trying to rally around a given approach, so that, the worst thing I feel sometimes is like we're winging it, or that we're not taking the exact same approach across the board. To an extent, there probably should be, as head judges, latitude in a lot of these things. Sorry. But, in others, it would be great if we were aligned somehow. Sorry. It's my long-winded reading of a 2-second text. Thoughts, postulations, comments?
I mean, I totally agree. That's why I was asking the question of how is this defined? I don't know, because we don't, really do that out here. And it seems like what I hear, it's different. Obviously we see, oh, these guys are measuring it by pH, and it doesn't matter. I don't feel like exactly that. I don't think like there is, it's so new, and that's probably one of the reasons. But I personally would love to know more about it, and also carbonic maceration. And I mean, to me, I just don't, I don't experience it out here that much. And I was on that first jury in Costa Rica in 2015. And I think that's the last, other than very recently, it's become very popular. But that's the first time. And then now all of a sudden it's exploded. And it's just so interesting to me. And I really can't seem to find a definition, or this is the rule, or this is the parameters with which it's acceptable, this is acceptable, or this is how this is defined. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a good start to that conversation for sure.
Looks like Paul has a question. He rose his hand.
Well, not really a question. I was just wondering, well, it is a question. One of the things, when John was talking, I was wondering, when people think of Cup of Excellence coffee, what do they think of? It's like back in the very first days, basically Cup of Excellence coffee was always washed, and it was always clean, and it was always sweet, and it was always very subtly, subtly flavored. But now we're kind of entering, we started doing naturals, and now we're doing with these experimental processes. I don't know, what is the brand in terms of what does the Cup of Excellence brand represent in terms of flavor? And I think that kind of gets to that whole marketing aspect. What will people, when they go to the store and they see the Cup of Excellence seal on a coffee, what are they responding to? What will make them buy that coffee? And it seems like we're going to do some changes there.
Yeah, great comment. I think it, we talk about the innovation around introduction of new varieties like Pacamara when it first started to kind of be introduced into the jury, and there was so much divisive, the lovers and the haters of Pacamara, and we kind of weathered through that, and then the geisha storm that we're still in, and now this. And I think along the way we want to invite and encourage innovation, but we also want to be able to send a clear message to consumers as to what that stamp of approval is. Like Paul's saying, it's something to really consider and think about, or subcategories of quality. And that's something, when we see other competitions that have, the exotic category, which really is the experimental coffees out of Panama, for instance, and then washed. And so are we going down that path of maybe needing to look at subsets of quality and subsets of winners as a possibility? Not trying to say that's where we're going, but it could be, up for discussion for sure.
Well, and to Paul's point, I think that's the bigger conversation, right? Is the mission of the competition and what you want to not only succeed with but be known for, and so much of that it will be how you're represented, as Paul's saying. I think one of the things that John hit on, like all the things that I do, you know, like, so the idea of allowing for something to move from national to international based on a potential is a latitude that I think most head judges appreciate. You know, and then trying to rein people into the degree that you can to find some commonality, which gets back to the idea of what Alex was saying, which is our root base is clean and sweet. That coffee has to be clean and sweet, no matter how crazy it is. Sort of gives you a little bit of a central focus to work from. My concern with innovation, there's no concern. We want innovation, but what I worry about, and is one of the things that I think that we're known for is egalitarianism, right? Is the idea that anybody can come into Cup of Excellence and succeed. And some of the worry with taking on the processing as a focus is that you start to maybe parse that a little bit and skew it towards people who have resources, skew it to people who are maybe in a better place to be able to succeed. So if we're not careful, we might be filtering our sort of input and filtering our coffee audience, so to speak, both on the input and on the output, right? So there's a little bit of that self-fulfilling prophecy of who's on the international panel, what coffees get through, who's buying those coffees. So those are definitely somewhat connected too. But you know, one of the things we can control, or to some degree, if we can, is the idea of who's playing, who gets to play. And while we may still be able to say everybody gets to bring a sample in, I want a heads up. I don't have an answer, sorry, but I want a heads up that we're keeping this sort of in our heads that this could be its own filter if we're not careful. And it probably it needs continual discussion.